Okay, so I'm with Tanner Crosby from Crosby and Milan, a relatively new real estate agency based in Malaga City, but covering the whole of the Costa del Sol. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about yourself and the agency.
So we're a Spanish American team, and we work primarily with American buyers who are either moving to or investing in Spain. I work as a real estate buyer's agent, and my partner is a property and immigration attorney. Um, so we don't work exclusively with American buyers, but that is where we offer the most value just because of my background, obviously, and my partner also spent some time working in the US.
What is your background? Tell us a little bit about that.
So I started my career working as a financial consultant. Basically, I'm an actuary. So I worked in management consulting for a long time in New York. Um, and that was, a great place to kind of hone my negotiation skills for sure. Um, and we do work with, I mean, we work with clients who are doing a variety of things, definitely a mix of people who are investing and, buying places to live. But we did, start out focusing more on even just personal connections who were looking to invest in this area, kind of playing off of my financial background. I'm originally from Wisconsin, which is in the center north of the US, and I also lived in Texas for a while, and then in New York for a long time before I moved to Spain. So New York to Malaga was an interesting change.
Okay, so I mean, you are part of what I would consider the sort of the new breed of U.S. based agency setting up here in the Costa. So something that we didn't see for years and years and years. Why did you move here, and why real estate? I guess is the question.
Honestly, I moved here because I met my partner in New York, who was working there as a Spanish lawyer. But real estate here, I mean, initially we got more interested in just the city of Malaga and what's happening in Malaga. Malaga is undergoing obviously a lot of change, and has been getting a lot of attention. I know that you know Mark Sanderson. I saw that you just did an interview with him. He's obviously, coming over from the US. So we spoke to him and kind of got his perspective on what's happening in the city and the future of this area. And I think it's a really interesting place to live and a really interesting place to invest. And it was very organic, just talking to people who had, let's say interesting real estate experiences here. We felt that we could provide value, and that's kind of how it took off. And we were, maybe not lucky, but I would say really lucky in that we had a lot of interest from the beginning. There are, as you know, a lot of Americans who are interested in coming here, and we could have, we could spend probably an entire hour just talking about why that is. And it's something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about.
I'm quite interested to maybe not an hour, but just to get the condensed version of the question I've been asking everybody, including I think I've asked you this before as well, is what I understand why Americans are buying here, but I don't know why they're buying here now and not 3 years ago. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think to some extent it's something that needed to just take off, and Spain has not been a known, I think it's a lot of things coming together kind of at the same time. The big sexy answer is politics, and I'm just not really convinced that that is the true driver of what's happening. Because I think you will hear people say, and we do hear clients say that they came here because of the political situation, or they want to move now because of the political situation. But in my experience, most of those people already had the idea in their head. It's something that they were thinking about for a while. So it might have been the thing that made them kind of finally pull the trigger, but it's usually along with a bunch of other factors. I think Spain, was not known to Americans for a long time. We have obviously, cultural heritage from a lot of different places, but there were not a lot of Spanish immigrants coming to the US. So we have, obviously this love affair with Italy, with France, and that makes sense because we have a lot of Italian and French heritage. But Spain, no. And then Spain was under a dictator for quite a long time, relatively recently. So there just, I think, never was a reason for it to be top of mind for Americans as a place to move to or invest in. I think one aspect of this that doesn't get enough attention is the influence of Latin Americans and Latin American culture on the US. Uh, This is one of the fastest growing demographics in the US. And that has to be part of it. And nobody's really talking about that, or I'm not hearing a lot of people talking about that. Like you talk about, there are tons of Americans coming, like 20% more Americans came this year than last year, or and that's true, but also, coming from Venezuela, Colombia, Argentina, there are loads of Latin Americans coming to Spain, and I think that they really go together. 14% of Americans speak Spanish at home.
One thing I've noticed, I don't know if this concurs with what you're just saying, but I've noticed here in the Costa, I saw quite a few Latinos moving here via America, meaning that they were living in the States, in Miami or somewhere, and they're actually moving here. So rather than moving directly from their home country, they were in the US and they're moving here.
100%. And I would love to see more complete data on, it would be so cool if we could look at everybody who's coming from the US and what was their country of birth, or even what state did they come from. Just you could find some little studies about that, or, some company had client interest from XYZ places. But it's really hard to see. But anecdotally, that's what we're seeing, and that makes sense to me. I was just in Florida last month. I was doing a presentation on the Spanish real estate market at the Miami Global Real Estate Congress. And I also was with the Orlando Global Council of Realtors. And everybody that I spoke with knows somebody who's interested in coming to Spain. And a lot of times the reason is because they have, for example, dual citizenship with the US and a Latin American country, and they have this really streamlined process towards citizenship in Spain. Or their grandmother was from Spain, or they have a cousin who's in Spain. So for sure, that's a big driver.
So you currently reach your customers through the networks that you've built up over the years, and initiatives like the ones that you're doing at the moment. So a slightly different approach maybe to other agencies is, because I noticed that on your website, the one thing that stands out compared to your typical real estate website is that I could see there weren't any properties on it.
No, yeah, we don't.
Quite different.
Properties at all. Yeah, that's intentional. That was before we even, kind of honed in on focusing on American buyers. We knew that we wanted to focus on buyers in general, not because there's anything wrong with listing properties or, kind of playing to both sides. But just that, I think the figure of a buyer's agent in the US is more important. And we saw that as kind of an underserved need, especially for the American buyer segment. So yeah, we don't list properties. We're truly, neutral, dedicated buyers advocates. And a big part of our value proposition is that we search the entire market with no bias at all, that our only goal is to find the best property for you. Honestly, from a marketing perspective, we probably should make it look like we have properties, because that would be more interesting for people to see. But it's not really consistent with what we're trying to do.
Okay, so let's go into your market then a little bit more. So what would you say are the most common misconceptions that you're finding North American buyers have with regard to the sort of the local real estate market here?
It's a good question. I would say the biggest one is probably that, because there are all kinds of, I guess you could say, misconceptions about what the process will look like, but it's not so much that they have a clear idea of how they think it will be, and it's different. One true misconception is there are a lot of people coming in expecting to find severely discounted properties. And for sure, where we are on the Costa del Sol, that's not as easy to find. There are some great opportunities to do that in Spain in general, and for sure we can connect, potential clients to somebody who can help you do that. That's definitely an opportunity in Spain. But on the Costa del Sol, as you know, it's not that easy to find. There are pockets where you can still find good value, I think. And I don't think anything on the Costa del Sol is a bad investment. I mean, for sure you could find something that's a bad investment, but the area in general is, I think a really smart investment choice. But that's one big misconception, that, I'll be able to come and spend $80,000 US and buy a house that I can comfortably live in with my partner. Even something up in the mountains you're not going to find something like that. So that's a big one for sure. I think also just kind of maybe there are some misconceptions about the roles that the buyer versus the seller plays in the process, and like in particular how much you can get out of negotiations. We pride ourselves on being able to negotiate to get the best possible deal for our clients, but at the end of the day there's not as much of a culture of we're going to come in and find everything that's wrong and you as the seller are going to fix it and that's how we're going to close the deal. And a lot of times people coming from the US are really aggressive on the negotiation side. I don't know if that's a misconception, but that's something that we notice.
So what would you say would be the piece of advice you'd give any North American potential buyers about what they should bear in mind when they're looking to buy in Spain? That first of all, that they're not going to get an easy bargain here, maybe,
Yeah.
and that the negotiation process isn't as the same as it is there. It's more like you get what you see. This is what you're buying. Anything else that you would say you're having to give them as a piece of advice?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, at the end of the day, it is, even if you speak Spanish, because a lot of our clients do speak Spanish already, you are navigating a foreign process. So I would say the most important thing is work with trusted partners, however that is. Somebody who was here who worked with somebody who they liked, or you do a lot of research and find the best people. But we have seen, I mean, especially given that my partner is a lawyer, and I know that you've heard a lot about this and seen this as well. Like, there are a lot of people out there ready to trick you. Like, I don't want to scare anybody, but people will try things when you can try things. So just be careful that you're working with somebody who can advise you properly. Another big difference, I mean, you already mentioned, is this question of an MLS. Like, I've heard a lot of people say here that, like, yeah, we do have MLS. Like, for sure, there are platforms that look kind of like an MLS where you have maybe even a ton of properties aggregated in the same place. But there's no one centralized MLS in the same way that there is in the US, where every geographic region has, for the most part, one central MLS with, say, a corresponding public platform that the average person out there looking to buy a house can go and see almost everything, with very accurate data. And that makes it so that buying a house in the US is really something that you could, in a way, do at least a good chunk of by yourself with confidence. I wouldn't recommend that here. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to recommend that here because of what I'm doing.
So the advice would be set up a team of local professionals. So like yourself, estate agent, lawyer, anything else, mortgage broker, or
Yeah, I
how
mean,
does that come into the mix with U.S. buyers?
if you're looking for financing, a mortgage broker is a good idea. If you're coming from the US, you should be aware that the kind of pricing structure for that looks a little bit different in the US. Typically in the US, you can work with a mortgage broker from your perspective basically for free. Here, that's not how it's set up. So it's not very expensive. And again, especially if you're navigating in a foreign environment, it's something that I think in a lot of cases could be worth it. So mortgage broker for sure. I mean, I do think another tip I would say for buyers coming from the US is, and also you hear this from Northern European buyers, I think a lot of the time. Obviously, here on the Costa del Sol in particular, and I think in Spain in general, it's not as common to do inspections before you buy the property. I mean, it is something that you can do. The type of sort of technical inspection that you do before you buy a house here is not going to be as comprehensive as the standard inspection that you would do in the US and I guess in some other places. And there's nothing wrong about that. There are reasons for that, but it does make sense to try to work something in before you start to put a lot of money down if you can. Why not? It's not that expensive. It's usually fairly easy to coordinate. So I would say, like, if you can find an architect or somebody who can do a basic technical inspection, that's another good person to work with. And, your real estate agent for sure should be able to recommend somebody to you that they've worked with before.
Do you think it's the real estate market in the U.S. is highly regulated, isn't it? And here I could become an estate agent by tomorrow afternoon. Is that something that throws people off, or not really? Is it more a warning to do your due diligence when choosing a real estate agent? How do you frame that for a potential buyer?
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's something that throws people off initially because I don't think they have a lot of insight into the extent to which it's regulated or not regulated when they start the process and as they're going through the process. Maybe it's something that they realize afterward because they had a bad experience. Um, but there are still a lot of great agents here, so it's like a little bit of luck, or it comes down to how you do your research. So I don't know if that throws people, but I think that's something that definitely impacts people, and means that maybe sometimes they don't have an ideal experience. And I know there's a lot of talk about regulation here, and I think that that is, in general, probably I have to imagine that going forward, the state of the market, at least in terms of the buying process, will mirror at least more than it does today what it looks like where the current buyers are coming from, no? Um, like there are a lot of Scandinavians coming, even more than before, people coming from the US, from the Americas in general. So, I I know that there's already a lot of talk about agent regulation here on the Costa del Sol next year. Obviously, we've seen more of that in other places in Spain. I think that you'll see higher regulation of agents in the future for sure. And I would also guess kind of more transparency in the whole process in general.
Quite a few uh, agencies that deal with international buyers, like such as yourself, one of the elements that they find challenging when dealing with potential buyers is the lack of transparency or lack of availability of actual sales information. When so sort of establishing what things should be worth, etc., what the lack of historical data for any given property, is that something that you found to be a challenge from your side?
100%. People come in and expect that we'll be able to just check on, yeah, something like how much did this buyer pay for this property 35 years ago? Or, yeah, even, I mean, we just had a situation with a client who was looking to buy a casa rural. Um,
It's a country home, isn't it?
Country home, yeah, who was looking to buy a country home here east of Malaga up in the mountains. And we found a beautiful property that we were pretty sure was too good to be true from the beginning. And sure enough, I mean, like they gave us, it had a licencia de primera ocupación, which here is basically the license, sort of the modern license that tells you that a property is habitable for all intents and purposes. Had an LPO, it had the escritura, everything seemed to be in order, the building license, it seemed like everything was done perfectly. And that happens to be, it was a situation where the town had sold the land and everything was quote unquote legally built. But then the Junta de Andalucia, the regional government, came in and said, like, no, 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 you can't sell that land, and invalidated everything. So all the paperwork and the licenses are still there. And if my partner had not gone off and done the research to dig up the court records and kind of like investigate the house because it seemed like something was off, they would have bought a house that is, worth probably a quarter of what they were paying for it. And there's not even like a note about that in the registry. No, you have like a house that went through like legal battle basically, and that data is not even there. So it is, yeah, it is really hard. You have to really either be able to do your research yourself or work with somebody who's willing to do that research and that homework for you. It's not easy to come across good data for a particular property or in general on the housing market.
Yeah, I think the one thing everybody agrees with in this industry here is that it's a prerequisite to get a good local lawyer that understands what to check. With that, there's no problems because they can find out if there's anything you need to know. Without
Yeah.
it, because you don't need a lawyer to make a transaction purchase here. And a lot of Spanish people don't use lawyers, and they're from here and they know what's what. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway from any interview I've done over the last few years is you need a local lawyer with local expertise that understands what's what. Because one of the things that throws a lot of buyers, and it's not just the way it has been, is basically what you just described, that one authority can give you permission and another authority can say they shouldn't have done that. And rather than it being their problem to sort out internally, it actually affects you. So you've done everything by the book and suddenly you find out that that book's been chucked out the window. So that's what the importance of a local lawyer, I think, comes. So going into some more fun things. One thing that we're trying to establish is there any pattern to what kind of properties North Americans are looking to buy and where on the coast? And the reason I asked that specifically is I've not seen a pattern. And it seems that unlike European counterparts, they will consider Malaga City with Marbella in the same conversation, which typically are very different markets. Is this what are you finding?
I mean, there's a lot of variety for sure. I've actually dug into because you can go into the census from the National Statistics Institute of Spain and see at least where people are registered on the census. And obviously, this is not complete, especially when we're talking about international buyers. But for people who live here, you can see by country of birth where they choose to live, very specifically, like down to the municipality. And for people from the US who are registered and living in Spain, you really like, I can't find any pattern. It's super spread out. It's not as much like, because it is very common for people who aren't familiar with this area to have, a pueblo that's like 90% British or like a town that's mostly Swedish or Finnish. And that doesn't seem to happen as much with people coming from the US. And that's also my experience in working with our clients is that we see a lot of variety. I think people coming from the US, obviously, and this would not just be the US, but coming from any American country, obviously from a distance perspective, are much more comfortable. They don't need to be right in the middle of the city center. They could be an hour away. They'll say it's like, as long as we can get there, like driving in an hour, no big deal. You're not going to hear anybody say that who's, coming from another European country because your sense of scale is totally different. So I do feel that our clients coming from the US are more open also to things that are farther inland, for example, because they're not bothered by the idea of driving down to the beach. They don't have as much this sense that we have to be right on the beach. For sure, there are people that want to be, or if you're looking for an investment property, for an example, something closer to the water is obviously ideal, but maybe like a little bit more open in that sense, other than just seeing a lot of variety.
There hasn't seemed to be particular US pockets yet. I presume in the future there will be, right? People tend to stick together a little bit. So maybe there'll be a little village that becomes 50%, North Americans or something like that, or Malaga City or something.
It could be, I don't know, but I do kind of feel that Americans have less of this sense of like, we need to stick together with somebody who looks really similar to us.
Right.
I think also because there's less of a language barrier because so many Americans speak Spanish or have some familiarity with Spanish. I don't think they feel that they need to have an English speaking pocket for sure. And I think looking at any American country, really, you have really relatively recent, like pretty extreme cultural integration that has impacted the way that they think about themselves and how they interact with other people, for better or for worse. So I do think like somebody coming from the US or even somebody coming from like Mexico, for example, or Colombia, Argentina for sure, is going to be less, it's going to be less important to them to kind of be in a pocket.
Okay, so year ahead, how do you see it with your market?
With our market a year ahead,
Yeah, the next years. How do you see the next 12 months?
that's fair. I think, I mean, again, there's a ton of interest right now. There's this kind of flurry of activity. I think that will continue for the next few months and then probably die down a little bit. I think that Americans will continue to be interested in Spain for all the reasons that we, talked about previously. But I don't think it's going to be like a huge, 1,000% increase in January when, there's some kind of a shift in the US. I think it will kind of continue the way that it's been going. And then, much longer term, I think that we'll start to see some kind of shifts in the market, like what we talked about before in terms of transparency, the buying process. I think that probably people who are coming from American countries also is true for anybody coming from a foreign country, but can benefit a lot from, a full service experience, like working with an agency who can help you not just from start to finish, but also after you finish, or be kind of a hub to connect you out to all of the right people. So I think that will continue to be popular and be more and more popular. But I don't think there's going to be any, huge uptake. Yeah, I think it will keep going the way that it's been going.
Okay, Tanya, well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for giving us your time and your insights.
It was great to talk to you.